Beginning scene of the movie, an astrologer discovers 3 bright comets falling fast to the earth. He understands the sign and goes to report it to a Catholic priest, who then realizes the doom this represents and becomes sober. The priest attends a meeting of the Roman Catholic Church the next day where he uncovers his recent studies on Revelation chapter 8 of the Bible to the Pope. He says, "The recent events on the earth have happened according to the sequence of events spelled out in this chapter of the Bible. 5 out of 7 angels have already blown their trumpets, and the falling comets would imply the blowing of the 6th trumpet. Woe to the earth and the people living in it," he says. In the next scene, an American diplomat, Robert Thorne, receives an emergency call from a Catholic hospital in Rome telling him his wife is in labor and has had some complications. Getting to the hospital, he's informed by the chaplain, known as Father Spoleto, that the child is gone. He's then advised to adopt after letting him know that his wife's womb is damaged, meaning she won't be able to give birth to any more children. Father Spoleto brings him an orphan child, which he tells Robert the child lost his mother at the same time his wife lost her child. Later that morning when Catherine wakes up, Robert takes the child to her but doesn't disclose the secret adoption as the priest instructed. They later name him Damien. 3 years later, Robert, who works as an official at the American Embassy in Rome, is later made the deputy ambassador to Great Britain after his superior, Stephen. So, he has to move his family to London from Rome. Meanwhile, on Stephen's way to an emergency meeting, he gets stuck in traffic and has to cool down due to the heat in his limousine. No air conditioner? Suddenly, a series of unified events occur, causing him to pass away gruesomely in a fire accident. Therefore, even though he feels grieved, Robert has to head to Stephen's office as the ambassador to Great Britain. 2 years later, during one of Damien's birthdays, his nanny discovers something really strange. She finds a dog that stares in fright at Damien as she carries him around. So, out of the blue, she goes on top of a building and calls out to Damien, saying she's doing it for him, and jumps with a rope around her neck, eliminating herself. A commotion rises in the party immediately and Robert quickly looks for Damien, then carries him on his shoulder to pat him, while Damien himself waves at the dog. The next day, while Robert goes to welcome the Saudi ambassador at the American Embassy, the press try to get words from him concerning the situation, but he ignores them. He later accidentally collides with a photographer called Keith Jennings, who falls and damages his camera. Robert promises to pay for the damages but doesn't give Keith his number. A priest from Rome, Father Brennan, later looks for Robert at the embassy and claims that he participated in how Robert was given another child as his son. He tells Robert the child's mother was a jackal, but Robert doesn't seem to understand, as he's not clearly expressing himself. Robert thinks he's only trying to bring up blackmail about his son for money and sends him away from the building. But while he's being taken outside the building, Father Brennan leaves Robert with a bit of advice to accept Christ daily and take the Holy Communion for him to overcome the devil's son. Upon getting home, Robert finds Catherine desperately in search of a new nanny. Just then, one Mrs. Baylock applies in a very convincing fashion and they employ her at once. Surprisingly, Robert listens to Father Brennan's advice to go to church and take the Holy Communion. The word church and the symbols of Christ on church towers begin to haunt Damien on the way, so he starts to act violently and injures Catherine as a result. This makes Robert ask the driver to turn around and take them back home. Later that evening, Catherine begins to wonder about Damien and concludes that he's strange, realizing how he has never fallen sick since birth. When she tells Robert this, he only calms her down and says Damien is a healthy child. After a terrible night full of nightmares about Damien, Catherine goes out to the zoo with him and observes in fright how the animals react violently to him. She gets worried that Damien really is strange, and even scared because Robert doesn't seem to believe her. Robert soon goes to church all by himself and Father Brennan meets him. He arranges a secret place for them to meet outside the church the next day, informing him that Catherine is in great danger and will die if he doesn't come. In addition, he says that would be the last time Robert would be seeing him. Concerned about his wife, Robert goes to see Father Brennan, who then tells him to look for a man named Bugenhagen in Megiddo to learn how Damien must die. He also tells Robert that Catherine is pregnant and Damien will ensure she doesn't give birth, which is why he was told by Father Spilato that her womb was damaged. He says Damien is the devil's son and wants to take everything he owns. Robert only gets angry and threatens Father Brennan never to see him again. Then he leaves. Father Brennan tries to leave a while after, but he finds himself under a storm and attempts to flee into the church. Just when he gets there, the door of the cathedral locks and he's eliminated. Robert gets home and soon finds out Catherine is pregnant. But because of Damien, she doesn't want to keep it, saying she doesn't want any more children like Damien. The news of Father Brennan's death also gets to Robert and he begins to have mixed feelings. While Robert is away, Damien finds Catherine tending flowers in a vase and causes her to fall downstairs, refusing to save her. She's taken to the hospital immediately, where they discover that she suffered a miscarriage from the accident. When Robert comes to visit, she begs him earnestly to prevent Damien from killing her. But after Robert leaves, the new nanny comes by the hospital with Damien and finishes Catherine off, while Damien somehow prevents the policeman on guard from hearing Catherine's cry. Later, Keith, the photographer, calls Robert about some strange things he has noticed in the pictures. Keith invites him over to see a mysterious aura around Father Brennan in all of his photos. Keith has also found some personal photos of him, one of which he found a birthmark tagged 666 on him. Then, he takes him to Brennan's place where he stayed before he died. There, he shows him a clipping of an astrology magazine showing a comet that fell 5 years ago in Europe, June 6th. Another clipping of a newspaper also shows the announcement of a child born on that day, at 6 a.m. Keith soon tells Robert that he is in danger himself. This is because Keith has also found himself with the same mysterious aura he found around Father Brennan. They then go to Rome together to find out about Damien. Upon getting there, the Catholic hospital where Catherine gave birth is announced as burnt 5 years ago, killing most of the staff. A nun later gives them Father Spilato's location and they set off to find him. Meeting him all burnt out, he is given the address to Damien's true mother's grave. At the graveyard, Robert opens the tombs and finds first a jackal skeleton and then a child's. Just then he realizes that Damien's parent was truly a jackal, as Brennan said, and that his son was killed. Not long after this, they are attacked by a pair of rabid dogs but manage to escape after sustaining a few injuries. That evening, Robert gets a call about Catherine's death and he also has a terrible nightmare about Damien. Then, in the morning, he goes with Keith to Megiddo in search of Bugenhagen just as Brennan instructed. Upon their arrival, Bugenhagen explains that Damien must be terminated only on the altar of God and gives Robert some instruments with which to eliminate him. When Robert begins to have a second thought, Bugenhagen tells him furiously that Damien is not his son, but a beast bearing the mark of the Antichrist, and that Mrs. Baylock, the nanny, is an apostle of hell. Robert does not believe that he has any birthmark since he bathes him by himself, but Bugenhagen tells him to check under his hair. Confused, Robert declines due to his conscience and tries to flee. Keith packs up the instruments and then goes after Robert to convince him further. Robert takes it from him and tosses it. Seeing that he won't, Keith vows to do it by himself and goes to recover the instruments, but, while he's at it, another series of orderly events occur, and Keith gets decapitated. Robert sees this and admits that Damien really is evil. He goes back home at once to confirm this. Upon getting back home from Rome that night, Robert picks up a pair of scissors and attempts to sneak into Damien's room. On his way, he's attacked by the nanny's bulldog but narrowly escapes by tricking it into a hole. Then, he goes ahead to sneak up on Damien while he's asleep and gently cuts a part of his hair. There he finds the 666 mark on his scalp and becomes terrified. At the sight of this, Damien's watchdog, Mrs. Baylock, attacks him with the intent of preventing Robert from harming Damien. He knocks her out and picks up Damien immediately. Then he makes a run for it towards his car to drive Damien off to church. As he drives and attempts to flee, Mrs. Baylock shows up in front of the car and he rams her down. His police guards suddenly see his car zooming away and follow it, taking it to be a kidnapper of some sort. As soon as Robert gets to the church, he runs for the altar and places Damien on it, saying the Lord's Prayer. But, before he completes the prayer, still holding the knife up in the air, he's shot dead by one of the police officers, who later realizes it's him. During Robert's funeral, the Pope also passes away after a terrible sickness. The President of the United States of America attends Robert's funeral, holding Damien by the hand. Then Damien looks back and smiles, glad to have been given the world's power to wreak greater havoc.